I just only eat meat that I source myself, really.
So what does that mean, you source yourself? Like,
so no, I don't mean I hunt it myself.
Right.
I mean, that I know exactly where it's come from,
Okay.
and that I trust the farms, and luckily, being in my position, I have a really good relationship with some of the my suppliers, so that really helps.
Yeah.
So I can buy it there. I don't really buy grocery store meat.
Right. Yeah. That's a tough issue just in general, trying to tackle the ethics of eating meat versus not eating meat, because it's so deeply ingrained into our food system, especially just, I'll be honest, I buy meat at the grocery store because it's just the easiest for me right now. I mean, and I wish I had like a better excuse. My other excuse is that it's cheap, but it's a tough one. And
I think, the reality is as well that, I'm in a position where I know how to cook, I have access to it, and I have the desire. Most people, it's financially driven. They can't make those choices financially, and it's not available to them.
Right.
And people don't really understand that actually just maybe eating meat once or twice a week and better quality, and spending up on your meat that you do buy is so much better than eating meat 3 times a day.
Right.
And just putting processed kind of rubbish into your mouth.
Right.
That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah. Anything to get more whole natural foods like vegetables and fruits in your diet, I guess. I mean, I've said it on this show multiple times, but I come from a background of dietetics. That's what I originally went to school for.
Oh, really?
But I was just not very good at school. Studying and exams, like organic chemistry, pretty much just after that class, I was like, I don't think I'm good enough for this stuff. So I just went into media.
Well, let you know, I come from a background of being a physician.
Well, yeah,
so I did organic chemistry as well.
Well, I read about that. It's just kind of an interesting transit. It's an interesting transition, but it's a transition I always like to see when someone goes from the realm of professional, up on the hierarchy of work, to like, I'm a baker and I care about food. That is really cool. I know Vanessa also in your kitchen space.
And she was a paralegal.
She was a paralegal, and she turned to food too. And I always love that story of that transition of just that high octane job to something that is also could be said as high octane, but is just, I don't know, it's of an entirely different nature. So how did you make that transition, and why?
So I've always loved food, loved cooking. It's been a really deep passion of mine, and I feel like, even from my late teens, early 20s, I feel like it was always just there. Should I do something in cooking? Should I not? And then I did well at school. I went to medical school, and then halfway through medical school, I had a real crisis of confidence, and I thought, shall I leave? And actually, I had all the kind of prospectuses for culinary school. I had my application all filled in, and I think my parents weren't really hugely supportive, and I got cold feet, and so I kind of canned that idea, went back to medical school and finished. And then this was always just simmering on in the background, this thing about food, and I don't know, I just woke up one day, like in my mid-30s, and I was like, F this. I'm going to wake up 50, and I'm going to still be wondering, should I have become a chef? And I said to my husband, I think I want to leave medicine. And he just said, just do it.
Wow.
And I haven't looked back. That's the real truth.
Wow.
And I love what I do, and I love the entrepreneurial aspect. I love the creativity. I love the people I meet. I love having my hands on the food.
Right. Yeah, I think the creativity speaks a lot for itself too. There's something so fulfilling about, in any aspect of work, just kind of taking those inner energies or whatever's going on in there and projecting them outwards. And it's just this really incredible thing about being human, where you can just do that and be really proud of that, and also affect the lives of others too, and bring people into that, because creativity kind of acts as this attraction point, or if you express yourself in a way that's really genuine and honest, people will be drawn to that. And that's especially true for food.
I think so. And I think that food is ephemeral in so much as it's not like being an artist where you create something and everyone looks at it. You create something and you gift it, and then it's gone. And it creates like this bubble of experience, and I kind of love that piece of it. And I love watching people eat my food, and I've been lucky to have worked in a bunch of open kitchens, when I was in restaurants, and you could see the food go out, you could see people eat it, you could like read their expressions. There's something that you get a real buzz from that.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So this transition from physician to food, it didn't go from physician to your own personal brand. You were in kitchens for a while. You were.
So I went to culinary school in London, trained in a great school called Leith's, and I didn't even know what I wanted to do with the kind of the food training. I didn't know what I wanted out of it. I don't even think that I really thought that I was gonna go into restaurants. But I, as part of the training, you go and do a bunch of stages, work experience stuff, and I just went into a restaurant kitchen. I just loved it. I loved the energy. I loved the kind of the camaraderie. And I really surprised myself. And in the end, I gave up one kind of career with like rubbish hours for another one with rubbish hours. But I was used to it. I was used to working night shifts, used to working weekends. It was kind of like that piece of it wasn't really a hard transition for me. Right,
because both industries are really brutal in that regard.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you're on your feet all day, and it's so, and then there's like, I likened it to doing like a night shift in the ER where, you come in at the beginning, you work like banging hard until like, midnight, and then there's like just this sort of like calming down period. It's kind of the same. You sort of like, there's this natural sort of break point that you have to get through, and then it's the same working like a night shift in a hospital as working a kind of a dinner service.
Right.
Kind of surprising.
So you're in kitchens, and then how did the transition go from that to you kind of starting your own personal brand then?
Well, I love working in kitchens, and I was really lucky to train in just some great places, both in London and then here. When I first moved to Minneapolis, I was introduced to Gavin Kaysen and helped set up Belcour, which was, like dear to my heart, and now is a piece of my heart.
Yeah.
That's a separate conversation, but incredibly sad to me
Rest in peace, right.
when Belcour shut. I felt very, very sad. But yes, I guess I was trying to find a route which gave me my own creativity, that I couldn't find anywhere in the Twin Cities that really made me feel like it was the food that I wanted to cook, which made me realize that I needed to be cooking my own food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that, coupled with having 3 kids and a husband that traveled, well, doesn't travel anymore, but traveled, made me think actually I needed to do something which I could control. And it all started out with this thing called social suppers that I was running from my own home. It was like a kind of we call it like a supper club. People do this a lot in the UK. And about every 2 weeks I'd do these kind of elaborate dinners for about 16 people. Like a set menu, 4 courses. People would buy tickets, and sometimes I'd know them, sometimes I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they'd be friends of friends. And I guess that's where the whole thing started. And I used to just love doing them, and people seemed to love coming to them. And then obviously when COVID hit us, I obviously had to shut all of that down. And then I was just sort of able to pivot it to what it is now, which has been a very interesting process.
Yeah, well, tell me more about what it is now.
Well, I guess it has become what happened was, obviously COVID hit. Yeah. Everyone shut their kitchens. Everyone was furloughed. I was working at Belcour part-time, so I stopped that. And I then just had this, luckily I was already renting this beautiful commercial kitchen space that I share with Vanessa and a few others. And so I already had my kitchen. And I just sort of had this feeling that everyone I knew was exhausted, stressed out, working from home, had their kids at home, and no one had anywhere to get food. And I was like, well, how about I just offer some food to my neighbours, and I just see whether anyone wants me to bring around some dinners for them. And it just kind of started from that. And from like 3 or 4 families I would cook for to being this kind of, much bigger operation where I now sort of, feed like maybe 30 families a week, and deliver food to their door. And I like to think of it as, beautiful, handmade, organic, healthy, but also utterly delicious food that you probably can't get anywhere else. And I seem to have quite a loyal following, surprisingly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I am now.
So, well, what are the logistics of that? Like, how did you even set that up? I mean, take me through the whole thing. Like, so.
Well, I can tell you the hardest thing at the beginning.
All right, tell me the hardest thing.
The hardest thing at the beginning was, when nobody wanted to go to a grocery store.
Right.
Like, they're like 2 weeks into shutdown, and I was like trying to let's say I was cooking for 8 families, and I would go to, I don't know, Whole Foods to try and buy chicken, and you could only buy 2 packets of chicken, and I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand, I'm actually cooking for 40 people. So it was like logistically, I'd go in and out, and it was ridiculous. And then obviously I started to get my supply lines a bit better, and things got easier in terms of food. But yeah, at the beginning I was like, well, this is what I'm going to be cooking. And then there were some weeks I couldn't get the ingredients, and people were wonderful and flexible about stuff. I was like, well, this week I can't get rice, actually. Do you remember those days when there was no rice in the supermarkets? So I kind of would do all the groceries, and then I would spend 2 or 3 days cooking and deliver like 2 or 3 days a week. Sort of initially it was just to kind of my neighbours, and then it sort of just snowballed out just by word of mouth. And now I'm kind of excited because there's this piece that's going on, but there's also something which I'm developing, which is like more of a like date night or dinner party drop off, which is kind of like, beautifully presented, like very little work that you need to do to it yourself, and like a restaurant experience in your own home, which is also doing well at the moment.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, those early days, were you kind of like on autopilot? Were you worried at all, or was it just like, okay, this has happened, now I'm going to do this? I mean, what was...
Well, so right at the beginning, I'll tell you, I have never been a stay-at-home mum. I've always worked.
Right. Being
at home, cooped up with my 3 kids, like, drove me insane. Homeschooling was, like, seriously, it was awful.
You actually did your own homeschooling regimen?
Well, we all had to, this is what it was. Our kids were all at home. I have an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Wow, that's a half.
So it was challenging. And so initially I would just try and leave the house to go to my kitchen to cook for a few hours. It was almost like my sanity. And then I realized that actually by creating some food and taking it to other people at this time of crisis, it was kind of creating sanity for them. And, then it was that sort of that juggling act of kind of like just my family life with work. And then just like the work sort of gradually stepped up. And, I've just taken somebody on board to help me, which is hallelujah, delighted about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say those early days were tough. I think that, my background in medicine, and specifically I was an infectious diseases doctor, gave me a degree of perspective and confidence. And I think it gave other people a kind of confidence in me, to know that, that I had this background, which meant that my concept of safe was a very safe concept. When we were all treading around on kind of like eggshells and not sure how to behave or what right was. We still don't really know, but
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. You were practically made for this kind of scenario. I mean, with everything that you've experienced in your past work, I can see how the reaction to some of these circumstances would be second nature.
Yeah, a little bit. And although I don't want to, belittle the pandemic, when you've worked in a hospital and you've trained to look after people with Ebola, it's looking after, considering, the consequences and the dynamics of the COVID virus it does help you put things in perspective.
Right.
So yeah, that was definitely helpful. But it's been interesting watching how my business has evolved, how the food industry is evolving, and there's obviously we're going through some crisis points, but I definitely also feel that the food industry is packed with incredibly innovative, entrepreneurial people who will kind of pull their businesses out of a crisis and will make it work. And actually, I feel very positive about what's going to happen out of it. I know that restaurants will close, people will lose their jobs. It's grim right now, but I don't think it's going to be grim forever.
Yeah. Well, change doesn't always look pretty when it first occurs, and it feels very uncomfortable.
Of course it does. It's like, it's hugely unsettling, and I think it's, particularly living in Minnesota, unsettling to know what's going to happen when it gets cold, because right now we have that sort of security of being, we can dine on the patio, we can eat and drink outside,
and journalists can interview people outside.
Yeah, and it's like on a day like today, it's like a day that God made. I mean,
right.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you can't believe that it's not going to be like this in 3 months' time.
Yeah, I'm going to miss it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that will be a huge challenge for the industry. It's been, obviously I'm from England, and it's been very interesting following what's happening in the UK right now. And there's been a very successful government scheme that has really, really helped the restaurants, called Eat Out to Help Out, where the government has subsidised restaurants, I think putting a 50% discount on their food Monday through Wednesday, to get people back into the restaurants, to restore people's confidence in going back inside and going back to eat. And I think that something like that could be very successful, in this type of environment when we end up having to go back indoors,
Yeah.
So we'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, how do we begin that reintegration process of getting people used to that again? Because I don't know, maybe the subtle changing of seasons in a place like here will be slow enough for people to get the hang of it. But I don't know, for others it might be jarring. When things start to get really cold, you have to be indoors almost all the time now, and then what does that look like? Yeah.
No, it's definitely tough, and I think what's hard, when I look at, for me, let's say if you go and eat out now, it's hard because you want to go and eat out, because I want to be supporting my own industry, but it does not feel like a relaxing experience, is the truth. You have to go, you have to get screened, you have to wonder where you walk, you have to, put your mask on here, there, the server comes to your table. It's, for me, it takes the hospitality out of what it should be. And
yeah,
I think for us as an industry, trying to work out it's not just, people don't just come to the restaurants to be fed, they come to relax, to experience a convivial atmosphere, to be served.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take those pieces out of it, actually how do the diners end up feeling at the end is a point that sort of troubles me as a cook, and also as a diner, and I think that's kind of why I'm trying to work out how I bring that gift of hospitality into someone's home, to create this safe way to dine without having to do the dishes, without having to plan it, without having to manage leftovers. I think that's going to be a challenge for us all.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it's lost the hospitality element, because dining out now is almost like an act of selflessness. You're not really going out because it's pleasing to you, like it's relaxing. You're going out for the mere act of support. Like, you're doing it just so that the recipient can survive. You're not doing it because, like you said, it's a relaxing, comfortable thing anymore, which it's not. And that's just kind of like a sucky thing to admit. And maybe if it's an open, wider outside space, it's a little bit better. But anything more confined than that, it's just, it loses that thing it once had.
Yeah,
Which makes it so hard for people, like, not just you and me, just anyone, just like me. Certain places I like to go out to eat, and just me being in my house deciding whether or not I should go out is just, I've never had to do that. Like, back in the day, if I wanted to go somewhere, I'd be like, let's just go. But now it's just like, so I gotta get my mask, but where's the seating gonna be?
And have I reserved, or we can't just go and have a drink now, we have to reserve to have a table.
Should I get a 60-minute or a 90-minute?
It's complicated, and it takes the spontaneity out of it, and I think those are the things that weigh on our souls and make us feel kind of like crushed by COVID.
Yeah.
When you think about all of those layers that are frustrating. But, you know, it will pass.
Yeah.
It will pass. It's just getting through it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the best part about COVID, if there is a good part, is it's led to a lot of, for me at least, I know that it's been the same for many others, but it's led to a lot of self-reflection and understanding, like, what I want to do with my work and how that needs to change, and just having greater gratitude for just a lot of different things in life, and wanting to grow, but also discovering new things about myself. And that's something I want to ask you, and something I often ask people on this program is, like, is there something about you that you discovered during this whole thing that you're, I never knew about this element of myself, this is great? Or maybe you've just found it within yourself to do certain things that you never would have expected.
I think the two things that have really, like, come about for me, like, I mean, I think I've always known that I'm an introvert, but I've always managed to, like, find time to be on my own. But then having, like, everyone in one house all the time with no escape, you know, that has definitely been harder on me. I need a certain amount of time on my own, and that has, you know, been hard to find. And that's just part of, like, my soul reflection and my time just to kind of, you know, like, unwind and then also feel creative. I feel like I need to be on my own in order to process creative ideas.
Well, right, and in my opinion, that's not even an introvert thing. I think that's for everyone. Like, we all need stillness to kind of, like, bring forth creative ideas, and I mean, that's crucial. And if you lose that, you kind of just get lost in just the din and the noise of life.
Oh yeah, you just feel like there's chaos. Like, I feel like the chaos is reigning.
Right, and you can't. There's no such thing as a creative idea in that mind state.
No, and so that's the first thing. I think the other thing, which has just been, like, such a source of happiness and solace for us, has been I feel like our world shrank down. Our kids were at home the whole summer, but we just discovered this incredible neighborhood we live in, and our neighbors that we just waved at, like, you know, last year, like, are now our great friends. And it's really given me a real sense of community in a way that I don't think I had one, or I had, you know, like, it was loose before, but I think we now feel very bonded together.
Yeah.
It's like you kind of, like, you know, you've gone through the crucible together.
Yeah.
And you know, I think those bonds will be lasting, and that's a really hugely positive thing. Particularly, you know, as an outsider, not being Minnesota, not having any family here, not having any support here. Like, I feel like I've got these, like, giant arms of family now all around my local community. That's really amazing.
Yeah, and I hope more people feel that way, because perhaps this pandemic was like this cosmic reminder that as a society or something, we've grown too separate.
Yeah,
and we're
disconnected,
separate, and we're just not doing something as simple as talking to our neighbors.
Yeah, and I think there's that, and then, you know, obviously we all, you know, lived through those awful days of after the murder of George Floyd and the protests, and then just the ongoing kind of discussions going on after that. And I think that, you know, going through that together was a big deal, and, you know, I think made people who were not quite strangers but just acquaintances have, like, these huge, deep and profound conversations together. Yeah. As we all process that.
Right.
So I feel like, you know, you kind of get close in a very, you know, in like an accelerated way.
Yeah.
You open up and you show your feelings and you cry together in a way that maybe you would never have done before.
Yeah.
With people you didn't know so well.
Yeah. It's been a weird year, but it's just all things that needed to happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember before I moved to the US, I'm mixed race myself. My mum, who is of Indian origin, said to me, race relations are very different in the US. And I was like, well, what do you mean? She's like, yeah, it's a very different thing. There is a degree of racism there that you don't encounter in the same way in the UK and Europe. And I guess I swept it under the carpet and kind of ignored it because I was like, I can't believe that's true. This is America. But it is true. And it's kind of been shocking to see it. And it's just sad that in 2020 these discussions are still so live and so real, that need to happen. I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, let it all come out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, this country in particular is in dire need of a awakening or rebirth. I don't know, and hopefully if
change of leadership. I don't want to. Let's not get into politics.
Oh God, that's
edit that out.
That's a wormhole for sure. But it's not just that. It's just so many other things. I mean, it's just, and that's why, as you mentioned, the George Floyd situation and then the COVID situation. Hopefully, people become more conscious of things that we just have been ignoring. Like I just feel like we've all been living on autopilot, and like things are fine and da 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 da. But now that hopefully COVID is bringing a deeper understanding of who we are, and then George Floyd is bringing forth a deeper consciousness of a lot of the injustices that occur that we just don't even think about. It's like, oh, that's right, this is still a thing. This is something that we keep fighting for. So yeah. So I mean, with everything happened going forward, I mean, what are your thoughts and hopes, and what's your kind of attitude going forward?
I'm a positive person. I'm like a glass half full person. So I just believe, like, right now it's one step in front of the other, and there are good days and there are bad days, and you just kind of keep moving forwards. From a personal perspective, I feel like I've had an extraordinary year. Like, I've built this business which kind of was just sort of, I don't know, just going along in a sort of a undulating fashion to like going like full pace.
Yeah.
Working full time with my and full time parenting. So I'm kind of just looking forward to maybe seeing what the next arms of the business are going to do. I feel like delivering, I never thought that I was going to be a meal delivery service, let's be honest. But that seems to be, creating a lot of pleasure for people. But then it's just like, okay, so how do I then also do something which is, potentially a little bit more high touch, which is a little bit more, high-end restaurant quality. I'm not a fancy cook. I'm not never been a cook with tweezers and micro herbs. I'm a very, very rustic cook. That's the way I trained. I just believe in incredibly beautiful ingredients, looked after nicely and not overdone.
You had to have used tweezers at least once, though.
I do not own a pair of kitchen tweezers.
No. And you're like, in your professional, in kitchens,
I have never used a pair of tweezers.
Wow. Okay.
I use my hands and I use tongs.
All right.
But that's I trained under the tutelage of a place called the River Cafe in London.
Yeah.
The River Cafe is was run by these two female chefs, one who sadly passed away a few years ago. So Rose Gray and Ruth Rogers. And Ruth, in fact, is American. They set the cafe up in the late 80s, serving rustic Italian food. It has had a Michelin star for